for this terrific day yesterday. It was really inspiring because I got so much input for understanding all the things you have done with, particularly in the realm of school and education. Today, I have my contribution is a little shift from there because I want to give you an insight in. I try to give you an insight in a larger collaborative alliance between universities and museums on the one hand, which is an ongoing project, and also I want to introduce you the first practice-based, research-based exhibition we did together, which was called Black Mountain. But first, I want to give you an insight in the overall framework of our general project. It is, interestingly enough, it is a network, and it's not a closed network. It is an expanding network where we, in some ways, when a project comes up in a very improvised way, start just to collaborate and work together. And my focus with in my field, I'm a professor for visual arts and contemporary culture, is also on performance art and new media. So it's a whole history of performative arts and performance art, which is in itself a difficulty to exhibit, because it's a very different field of making exhibitions. It's a challenging space. What do you exhibit when you maybe have leftovers or documents or whatever? So that's an added kind of challenge for both museums, but also for research. And so what we want to try to do in a larger perspective is modeling new knowledge experiences in that field. And right now we have a focus on, just in terms of theory and research, is new models of narration, scenography of exhibitions, audience involvement, education, and also digital knowledge design, because we found out that the digital realm is also having an impact on how you educate and how you learn, but also how you can involve different groups of people. So I try to give you an overall insight in the major kind of also theoretical thinking and framework of that project. And then I give you a more improvised insight. I just used the nice images so it's not too dry, what I'm saying now. I try to give you a more improvised insight in the project, which ended in 2015, which was the Black Mountain, an interdisciplinary experiment exhibition at the Museum Hamburger Bahnhof. The Museum Hamburger Bahnhof for Contemporary Art is my main partner in collaboration, but we also collaborate with the Tate Modern, the Stedelijk Museum, and the Louisiana Museum, and we did workshops and also invited people to give their insight and work on specific fields. I will expand on that, on the practical parts, and on where we are right now with our projects in the workshop, and I will ask you for your input and support in some pressing questions we have right now. So even though performance art and its significance and influence has been subject to a large amount of research and exhibition in the past decades, most approaches presenting and communicating performative arts were and still are largely bound to representational forms of knowledge production and traditional object-centered exhibition formats. With the aim to expand such approaches, the collaborative and interdisciplinary research project with a working title, now the title, I give you the title, Mind the Gap, Performance Art and Media, Practice-Based Research Between Universities and Museums, pursues collaborative international practice-based research on new strategies of exhibiting and collecting performance art and media in this globalized world. So we found out that our project, this project, Mind the Gap, Performance Art and Media, Practice-Based Research Between Universities and Museums, seems to be haunted by a quote from Alan Capro from 1967. So it's 50 years ago when Capro stated the following. He said, quote, I love this quote, I really have to read it to you. I'm put off by museums in general. They wreak a holy death which offends my sense of reality. Moreover, apart from my personal view, most advanced art of the half-dozen years is, in my view, inappropriate for museum display. It is an art of the world, enormous scale, environmental scope, mixed media, spectator participation, technology, themes drawn from the daily milieu, and so forth. Museums do more than isolate such work from life. They subtly sanctify it and thus kill it. So Capro gave in his statement to an exhibition in 1967 a very important kind of appeal call for a change of the museums. That was 50 years ago. And then, but he said this appeal was actually accompanied by the first retrospective of his work by the Pasadena Art Museum. And this retrospective traveled, interestingly enough, not to other museums, but to the Louisiana University, to the St. Louis University of Texas and to Texas Austin, so to two universities afterwards, because the other museums didn't want this exhibition, which was his first retrospective. And then he said again about this first retrospective in 1967. He started in the late 50s, as you know. Quote, "The collaborating institutions have shown an unusual understanding and willingness to accommodate the problem." This is the problem we have today too. The problem because being sensitive to the broad issues it calls up today, they are trying to make a step in the direction of solving it. That issue is not so much the abolition of all museums. They are entirely proper for the art of the past. It is rather the extension of the museum function into the domain of contemporary needs, in which it can act as a force for innovations lying outside of its physical limits. Eventually, in this way, the modern museum may gradually lose that cloying association of holiness that it presently inherits from another age. Hopefully, it will become an educational institute, a computerized bank of history, and an agency for action. End of quote, Alan Capro, 1967. So this kind of statement is kind of the mantra for our, attempts to approach the problem of exhibiting performance art in media. So our project, Mind the Gap, readdresses this key problem and possible solution for the current research of performance art. Although a substantial amount of research analyzing the impact of performance art in the 20th and 21st century has been done, this research requires a stronger collaborative connection with the professional practitioners of curating performance art and media in an expanded field of exhibition making and, most importantly, disseminating that cultural knowledge. Thus, the project builds upon the recognition that contemporary practice-based research and curatorial practice in performance art and media are challenged by the profound changes in the production and the experience of knowledge and contemporary culture in general. Prevailing accounts and concepts of performance art are still essentially based on representational systems and forms, which are predominantly developed along traditional research and exhibition formats for image and objects in a specific dispositive of space and architecture and in a context of analog technologies. The relevance of revisiting and revitalizing performance art from the 20th and 21st century, particularly in exhibitions over the last decades, thus requires a profound shift in new models and methods of telling histories of art and performance art, as well as developing more experiential knowledge and learning practices in inter-institutional collaborations. Testing these potentials of collaboration between universities and museums, the research and education project Black Mountain Research, which was done between 2013 and till 2015, was a forerunner and for us also a best practice model for a joint endeavor between Hamburger Bahnhof Museum für Gegenwart Berlin and the Freie Universitat Berlin, Germany. It was, and now it's important, I have to stress this, a continuous work in progress. That means we developed everything, also a concept for the project while we were doing it. So that was very experimental. We didn't sit down for a year and make a concept and then do it, but we just started working. I will explain it in a minute, and develop it on the preparation for the exhibition and parallel. And the project was called Black Mountain Research, and the exhibition was called Black Mountain, ein interdisziplinäres Experiment, Black Mountain, an interdisciplinary experiment. And the exhibition was on from June 2015 till the end of September 2015. Very short. People regretted that they didn't travel, but it was a very well accepted exhibition. We had more than 100,000 visitors, and also our platform, I will come to this, also was very well visited. We were surprised because, Black Mountain, as it's an exhibition on the famous art school, is a very, I would say, for the public, not so known topic and subject. It's more people who know the history of the avant-gardes, of course, know Black Mountain, but it's not a blockbuster, subject. And we started. Now I give you a improvised, just an insight in what was our process and going on, and then I will go back to give you some more, theoretical maybe or points to our Mind the Gap project in terms of what we want to do, practice-based research and knowledge development. So what we did in the beginning, the project started us really as a dialogue between our university, me and the curators, Eugen Blume and Gabriele Knappstein and others who were making a concept, and they actually were coming and asking because they had kind of the obstacle, how do we exhibit an art school, essentially, and the ideas, which is pretty much very difficult to do within the space of an exhibition, and how do we approach the archival materials, and how can we revive this, and plus, the biggest question is there in any way a possibility to somehow present the processes which were going on, the learning processes and the teaching processes, and also the forerunners of the avant-garde practices such as performative arts, such as an untitled event, in a space, in a museum space outside academia. Because what we do in our lessons for the students, of course, we teach about Black Mountain and Capro and Cage and Annie Albers and all the people who are there. But this is like a textual, and it's a different format. So it's a very discursive format. And how do you break that out and make it bring up the live experience, so to speak? And the first approach was in the beginning. Actually, it was a very sensual thing. Also, some of us traveled to Black Mountain. This is all old material. So the first thing was to get a feeling for what was Black Mountain outside of the artistic objects and products. So it was more an approach to the cultural impact and the cultural ramifications with the history of the exile and so on, before we took a closer look to what was, so to speak, produced or done there. So that was very important for us to get a sense of what was the environment there and how was it like to live there and be there. And so some of us traveled there. It's still so much, I don't want to use the word periphery, but it's very, very small and remote. Very small and remote. You can't imagine, it's like this is the building, okay, very small and remote. And so this was the newly built building. So we got familiar with, the approach was to get familiar with the environment, the educational facilities, the daily life. So essentially, we approached art through the environment of art and who was there first? How did people live there? How did they ride with a car to their daily work on the fields, which all people did, the students and the teachers and so forth. So our focus was not art, it was life, and community life. So, and then here, this was the second focus. So we approached them, all these people, this was not like a punishment or something like that, but a part of the curriculum of Black Mountain was work in gardens and, building things. So the general concept of Black Mountain was not just an education in art, but it was an education in all fields of life, and also a basic education in various fields of, traditional academia. Even though you would study, for instance, painting with Albers, you would do a math class, or you would do something in agriculture, which is very unusual, because also as you may know, like every, so to speak, semester or term, they redefine their curriculum with who was just there or invited or who came there. And then here you see Albers, but also we tried to read those images from a physical point of view. It's not interesting in which phase he was doing this, or he has these elaborate writings. Also, Albers has these elaborate writings on how to teach and how to practice, and all the interaction of colors is the important thing, which you could easily exhibit. But it was more important to get access to what Black Mountain did by getting a feeling how they did it. So the emphasis was not on what, it was on the how. So the first question was like the environment, and then the question was like the process is the how, not the what. So there is an interesting image, because you see in this time, like in the late 30s, early 40s, to be so casual in teaching is totally unusual. Or we also tried to read with our students or visitors that people were running around barefoot, which was like in this time where women and men were kind of equal, or they invited also some Black students to join them, and so forth. So those little things gave an insight in, the educational practices and the facility, without thinking about or reconstructing the educational history and methodology of Black Mountain as an alternative art institution. There were many, so to speak, alternative art institutions even before in the 20th century. This was not our goal, but it was more like, how can we give an insight in the practices of teaching, learning, and making art as a practice. And here again, it's another image of, how people worked there, or how lessons were taught. Also, the perspective of the image is interesting. It seems almost like a summer. It was summer art classes. Summer school was very important. The weaving class, for instance, was very important because everybody went to a weaving class. Also, men went to a weaving class, and Annie Albers was conducting these weaving classes, and they were considered being essential for an art education, which is also at this time absolutely unusual, because like weaving or ceramics or something like that were always treated, even in the Bauhaus context, as minor practices of art. And here also you see the hierarchies of producing art, and the relevance of making art was changed. So we had a kind of several, you see the dining hall, I have to say something about the dining hall. So we decided to reconstruct making art and then the performative art forms out of the practices in their specific environments which took place there. Also, we started to narrate it for the exhibition, and I'll come to that later. This dining hall, it looks like a banal photo on the first side, but then if you read Cage and others, it's very interesting, because in their accounts, they say the most important conversations and ideas for new projects, if something wasn't coming up in the classroom, they were happening there in this room, and the most brilliant ideas and concepts were developed in these kind of casual conversations. And this also seems to be very familiar to us, because we know this type of, kind of, so to speak, casual, informal, everybody's sitting there environment now from all this startup, Silicon Valley-like environments where creativity is fostered in a kind of forced into something. But there, it's also interesting that it was like a totally new model of, developing art in such an environment. You see the dance, of course, Saturday night. I mean, the Bauhaus also had like these parties, but still, to listen to the music, to be free, to be also, men and women living together in the campus and so on. The whole community life, as a base for artistic, avant-gardistic production is really fostered here. So again, this. Now here I have another impression on, this is also important because it's not just that they, of course, did plays or something like that, or music. Music also was very important, music as events in the evening, as a part of community building. But important is that in all these plays, like Rue of Medusa in the summer at Black Mountain College, Buckminster Fuller played a key role. So people, faculty played who never were actors, played key roles in plays students staged. That meant also you didn't have to be in a specific education or be specialized in something. They just shared their knowledge and worked together and took up roles they never took up before. Now I jump back to our collaboration. The collaboration was very much, we were going, basically what we did as a semester was very simple. We were putting up all the problems we had and tried to solve them step by step in investigating the materials from various angles, like these images. And we had we realized it is important to somehow transmit that it was community-based, that it was life-based, that there were processes going on which were not centered in art. How can we translate it into an exhibition? And then we had the idea, of course, we really have to, and the curators agreed on that, and it's quite unusual also for the Hamburger Bahnhof, that we need a strong spatial structure, an own spatial structure for the exhibition to represent this particularities of this Black Mountain space on a very different level. So we collaborated with an initiative which is quite famous in Berlin. They're called Raumlabor, Spatial Laboratory, and this kind of young group of artists, architects, and others who work in the curatorial field, but who are mostly specialized in working with the city, the outer spaces, the city as a creative space. And they developed a very specific model, spatial model, as for presenting certain objects, but also for certain, other elements to be presented in the exhibition. So it was more just like a scenography, but it was really like a space within the museum space, as a space of experience. And the second thing we developed was, let me see what comes next. I developed with my students. First of all, I was very, very skeptical, but one of my PhD students, she's very successful with, blogs and things like that in the art world. And she said, let's do a website and let's do something interactive in the digital realm. And I said, it's not good for Black Mountain. It was so experiential and so on. But honestly, this platform, this digital platform, was really turned out to be, in the process, we didn't know if it will work, as a fantastic form of an open source communicative platform. And I'll show you in a minute. I just finished this to give you an insight. And also what was important, the museum was, really trusting us to kind of witness the whole process of building and making and transferring that to the public. It was really interesting also to then on a website and for the visitors to see the making of, because because that made the process of what was going on and how because otherwise everything seems to be just come from outer space, it's there and it disappears, and make kind of our process as a process visible and experimental. Yeah, Raumlabor exhibition. So we had this exhibition architecture and all the dialogue and this making and how it worked. So, and we talked about, of course, came and visited them, and we talked about certain. And we had some fun. It was a lot of stress. This is a fun image, but we were constantly discussing things, and sometimes it was really funny. We also had conflicts about that, but we made remarks, and they said, "Never ever." The curators, "No, it doesn't work." And then we came back, and it was done like this, or the other way around. We made a suggestion, and so it was very, very much a live process with sometimes, and we were facing the unknown, with this. So this is because this is also, we made this public. I'll show you. Was it into this for everyone? So people could not only could participate in our process of making it, and also when I show you the website, It's at Tombly, and this is the opening. It was really big. It was like a festival too. It was really fun. And this was when it was open. So people really visited an own environment within this museum environment. So that was a spatial transformation and a processual transformation of the museum. And now show you this. And this was on in the museum, and you could activate the whole site. But the important thing about this was also, it wasn't ready when the exhibition was done. I mean, it was going on and on and on. Maybe also I have to say, it was an expensive exhibition, and we got funded by the Kulturstiftung des Bundes, which is like something like the National Endowment for the Arts, because it's very, everything with the archival visitations, with the involvement of the people, with all the experts. It was expensive. I have to say that to caution you, because the effort it took also meant that we had the resources to do this, including the publications and everything. But this, for instance, this is our platform. It's still on. And I did two large classes with students, PhD and other students, and everything on this site is produced by a whole set of people, students, curators, professors, people, artists. Everybody could contribute. So we had a kind of a team for instance, we had research topics. And this was publicly open. So this was, for instance, let me do this, sense of community, because I was mentioning it. So we had an ongoing flow of knowledge production by different agents and people from different levels of knowledge, like artists and others, or even people who have never had heard of it but had something to say about it. And we put it on this platform if it would match. It was surprising to me, because we didn't have hardly anything we could turn down, or so it was really going well. So here, Sense of Community, for instance, was an article written by C. Kate Moth from Edinburgh. I didn't even know her, but she did a PhD, and people contacted me, so it was a network of things. And we had, for instance, interviews. But these interviews, for instance, were contributed by Sigrid Pavelke, who was researching Black Mountain for many years and had never shown these interviews totally. And she gave them for the exhibition for us. And then, of course, we have this. Then my students, they like Instagram and so forth. They fed the social media things. We had 2 symposia. One at the beginning, very beginning, where we discussed all the difficulties with Black Mountain and the problems of creativity. We have videos of all the contributions to both. Both symposia. It was very important to have these symposia, because they were kind of the beginning of the experts and then the end of so to quote the experts, and we could push certain themes in academia on creativity and on education. We had a specific workshop on education. And then we had the section exhibition. We had the making of, as I mentioned before. Let's go there. And we made comments to the building. Making of de-installation was the last one, and it was very sweet. And so all of this could be accessed and seen by the visitors. So that was very nice, and we had a link to the museum, of course, and they had a big sign. So it was like as if you would, in some ways, what you know from hospitals or others, you see the whole thing working, being done, and you have the presentation of it. And this is the de-installation, and it's very, we have also an article of one of my students and being sad about it, because the de-installation is also interesting to see. It's an exhibition on performance. You will never see this exhibition again, so it's also disappearing in a sense. It is, of course, part of the archive of the museum. And yeah, this is the de-installation. What do you have? And then we had installation views, of course. What's also interesting, because you see the beauty of the exhibition and the installation before the visitors as a part of itself. So it's like a mirror. And then we have, of course, research statements, and then also resources, documents, photographs. And there, for instance, there was the Western Archives, which have a large part of the collections. They were very helpful. They gave us most of the materials for free, and they were happy we were using it. So yeah, so this was basically our. You can read about. So it was a really collaborative platform, and I don't know if I now for the new projects we can't do the same thing again. So I'm in trouble. I can't use this kind of collaborative website platform format again because we never want to repeat ourselves. So we are currently for the Mind the Gap project, which is trying to address the whole issue of performance art and performative arts. We are in the dialogue of doing new projects together, but not the same way we did this way. And I would like to invite you to my workshop this afternoon to discuss some of the keywords and issues for those ongoing projects. Thank you very much.